Hi guys! First of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody who has watched, liked, subscribed and commented over the course of the last month, my first month on BookTube. And thank you to the community for being so welcoming and for making this experiment such a pleasant experience. But on to today's topic. As I may have mentioned, I read my first Marlon James book last month, Black Leopard White Wolf, and it made me think I should really read more Caribbean authors. I don't think I've read any Caribbean authors so far, except for Gabriel Garcia Marquez. But he isn't really the greatest representative of Caribbean literature, especially not contemporary Caribbean literature. So this was still largely a blind spot on my reading map, which needed to be fixed. And once I had this thought, I went all out, or at least as out as I'm able to at the moment. And first of all, I picked up A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James, which had been gathering dust on my shelves. This was published in 2014, won the Man Booker Prize in 2015, and let me tell you, I'm only about 150 pages in, but already I'm thinking that it would have been downright criminal if this book hadn't won the Booker Prize. This is the fictionalized account of the attempted assassination of Bob Marley in 1976, or rather the story of about 10 fictitious persons who are all in some way or another directly or indirectly connected to Bob Marley or the assassination attempt. And I just love how Marlon James gives a voice to the kind of people who are usually silenced and how he lets them speak in their own voice, in Jamaican patois in this case. I'm going to do an in-depth review of this book, but it is going to take some time for me to get through this because, as people like to point out, the title is somewhat misleading as it is anything but brief. It is 700 pages long and the font is tiny. In the meantime, I'd like to talk briefly about 3 other books that I have read, but I'm afraid this is where the title comes in. The call for help in this case is a call for recommendations because, spoiler alert, I'm afraid all of these 3 books didn't really do it for me. Let's first get the classic out of the way. I picked up White Sargasso Sea by Rhys. Rhys is from Dominica, or was from Dominica originally, and she has some Creole heritage, although it's in the 78th generation or thereabouts, so it isn't really a thing. This short book is a prequel of sorts, or a companion piece to Jane Eyre, so if you haven't read Jane Eyre and for some reason still want to pick it up, put your fingers in your ears now. This book tells the backstory of the mad woman in the attic, Mr. Rochester's first wife, whom he locked in the attic when her mental illness got too much to handle, and who later burned down the house and killed herself so that Mr. Rochester could have his catharsis and Jane could marry him. In this book, Bertha is actually called Antoinette, and she is from a family of Creole plantation owners from Jamaica, and she was born more or less at the moment of the Abolition Act of 1833. Being from a family of Creole plantation owners, she is in the uncomfortable position of being simultaneously white and not white, depending on who you ask. To Mr. Rochester, who has recently married her and thereby rescued her out of poverty because she is orphaned, she is decidedly not white but rather exotic, and his latent contempt for her and Antoinette's inherited penchant for mental illness in the course of the book create a spiral and make each other worse and worse until Mr. Rochester snaps and locks her up, ships her to England, where of course the situation gets worse because she is now isolated from whatever allies she had back home and becomes the mad woman in the attic. I have to say, as a comment on colonialism and colonial attitudes, I find this awfully tame and almost trite. It might have been wild in the 1960s, but today I find it rather forgettable. And the first part of the book kind of ruined the whole book for me. What happens in the first part is that we learn why Antoinette was orphaned, or at least why her family isn't around anymore. And what happened is that a band of former slaves burned down the plantation house killing her younger brother and making her mother finally go completely insane with grief. And that leaves Antoinette stranded and isolated because everybody around her shuns her, because she is, to the black people she's white, and to the white people she's black. This is, of course, all a great big tragedy for the character as a person, as a young child who was in no way responsible for anything. But the thing is, in a book like that, a character like that is necessarily a representative of her class. And I have to say, it made me a little impatient that I had to read through this book and sympathize with a character while all the time I was just thinking, well, yeah, what goes around comes around. So I never really cared for the story and found it completely forgettable from beginning to end, I'm afraid. There was one memorable quote, though, which I even think I thought I recognized from somewhere, but I googled it and it yielded no results, so perhaps I'm making this up. If you recognize it from somewhere, please let me know. This is spoken by a servant girl back in Jamaica. "England," said Christophine. "You think there is such a place?" Which I read as a comment on how the noble image of England and Britain and the British Empire, the image of public discourse, is a far cry from reality. If you have any thoughts on this, I'd be happy to read about them in the comments. The next book I picked up is Claire of the Sea Light by Edwidge Danticat. Edwidge Danticat is a Haitian author, but she immigrated to the United States at the age of 12. This book is set in Haiti, in a Haitian small town or fishing village. And on Claire's 7th birthday, her single father decides to finally go through with a plan of giving her away to a family who he thinks will be able to look for her better than he can. But Claire is having none of that and runs off. And this is the point of departure for the story, to tell us the stories and backstories of various people from the town who are in some way interconnected and connected to Claire and her father in some way. And this is supposed to paint a picture of this Haitian village and the people from various social strata that live in it. In theory, this sounds right up my alley, and I should have loved this book, but I found the execution extremely unappealing. I can't even quite put my finger on what it was about the writing style, but I found it extremely sterile, like the author was just working off concepts of characters from the page in the most perfunctory way imaginable. These characters never really came to life for me, and I didn't get the feeling that I was actually in this small town, and I got the feeling that the author wasn't really able to imagine herself into this town either, or at least she, to me, didn't seem to have a good grasp of the living conditions of different kinds of people in this town. Of course, having immigrated at the age of 12, she was never really more than a tourist there, I suppose, afterwards. But people write convincingly about all kinds of places that they haven't actually experienced, so that is no excuse. Yeah, I just felt that the book didn't accomplish what it set out to do, at least to me. So the next book that I picked up is Ayiti by Roxane Gay, the first book of hers that I have read, and probably the last. This is a collection of her early work, short fiction and flash fiction, all about the experiences of people in the Haitian diaspora or on family visits back home in Haiti. With her fiction, I didn't get that feeling of artificiality that I had when reading Claire of the Sea Light. However, I didn't see that much more soul in them either, and this is mostly due to the writing style, which I thought was very bland. And it just takes more than an interesting or valuable theme for me to keep me interested. And then a good chunk of them are erotica and written in the most cringe-worthy and cliched language imaginable. Like, I feel so much pleasure, so much pain. The only thing I know is I want more. More of the dull egg and the sharp tingling. More of feeling like I will shatter into pieces if he pushes any further. Yeah. And then, to add insult to injury, the longest story of the collection is the one that she later turned into her debut novel, An Untamed State. And I ended up hating this one because I am ever so fed up with those narratives in which a woman doesn't want the baby that she is having. But then once it's there and she looks into its eyes, oh, everything changes and everything is magical and it proves to be such a healing experience for the woman. Screw you, seriously. I don't want to spend any more time reviewing these books. For the most part, I found them forgettable rather than bad and offensive, for the most part. I'm sorry that this has been such a negative video. I was hoping to maybe get some recommendations this way. I would prefer it if they were books that were set in the Caribbean as opposed to in the diaspora. So, no Queenie, for instance. I'm sorry again that I end up hating so many books that I read. For now, I guess I will just stick to Marlon James. I hope, for your sake as well as for mine, that the next time I turn on the video camera, I will have read better books to talk about. Until that time, please bear with me. Bye, gentle reader.